2, 1. Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, contrary to popular belief, debt isn't always bad, and in many instances, it is a necessary economic tool and reality in order to prevent economic crises from becoming worse. The only reason why planet Earth survived and is now actually thriving post-pandemic, which caused the most recent economic crash and shock, is because we were able to lift that debt ceiling and ultimately allowed governments to be able to print more money and as a consequence be able to roll out vaccines, bail out airlines and other necessary industries, and give people the needed relief and ayuda and stimulus checks they needed in order to survive and not die or starve on the wayside. That is to say, taking on debt is something necessary to do, and we from Opening Government are very much willing to be able to take the short-term harm of inflation in order to be able to get the medium to long-term benefit of not like a super hard landing where the economy crashes and dies, but ultimately being able to make it smooth and be able to lubricate those particular economic engines. That is to say, it's in their interest to protect the economy, which is a function of three particular stakeholders. A, big and small businesses, basically those who are constituting the environment. B, the average people, particularly those from the middle class or those who are poor. And C, making sure that your government is able to function in order to be able to make sure they can still roll out education, they can still roll out healthcare, etc. A few features of our model which I think can also serve as substantive material. Number one, who decides what to do if we circumvent Parliament, right? Like who's gonna do this because this is a policy? This is going to be done by the national government in partnership with monetary and fiscal side. Monetary side means your central bank, the likes of BSP, the Fed, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of England. And what I mean by the fiscal side is Treasury, and what this is important for is that they are the ones who are controlling the spending in terms of how you're going to be able to allocate those particular things. It's going to be a tandem effort in terms of deciding to what extent are we going to lift this and how long are we going to allow them to do it. Because obviously, this is going to only be done possibly within a year or maybe even within 6 months. The point in which the economic crisis is so severe that we actually need to use it as a last resort in order to be able to alleviate the economy and prevent it from going under. The second thing I'm going to talk about is why is it justified and why is it practical to circumvent Parliament? Because the other side might say, hey bro, it's a violation of democracy, infringing on the rights of people. Generally speaking, in these particular democracies, or even whatever form of government we're talking about, you often have a bicameral system, like the Senate or Congress who has to pass all of these things and approve it, or even the Parliament and the Prime Minister who have to debate, like what we're doing right now, in order to get majority consensus to allow it to happen. But just like what we see when you watch the news or when we take a look at what happens in the political arena, you have a lot of politicking, which can lead to these decisions taking super duper long because people put all sorts of politics and even social, cultural, and religious biases forward it. Meaning, this economic thing becomes a political issue. And I think it's not a political issue because whether you're left or right, whether you're a moderate, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, it's in your interest to be able to provide food for your family and make sure you still have a job and your business is thriving. That is to say, it's quite important to be able to protect those particular stakeholders that I mentioned in my peroration, which also include the financial markets, like the stock market, the bond market, and the real estate market, which are actually very important for huge swaths of people to be able to continue running their businesses and living their lives in a particularly good way. I'll take the POI, Chelsea, go.
Isn't unsustainable debt accumulation also a major driver of economic crisis?
Not necessarily, because the third point that I'm going to say that responds to that is I'm going to talk about inflation because obviously opposition will talk about, oh, it's unsustainable, inflation, it's going to be bad. I have a few structural reasons on how we're going to deal with inflation. And even if inflation is a short-term harm, the medium to long-term benefits are going to outweigh that. The first thing I have to say is that inflation in itself is not a good or bad thing. Let's not oversimplify this debate na, no inflation, good, inflation happening is bad. Inflation is something that can be controlled, and what's more important is that you're able to give people the productivity and the capacity to continue staying alive amidst this economic recession and not going hungry. Continuing to make sure that big businesses like Nvidia, Facebook, TSM, and all of the huge important businesses in all corners of the world are able to fulfill their functions of continuing to be able to provide people the goods and services they need, like in SM and Ayala, to make sure that we're alive. B, we can deal with inflation through monetary and fiscal ways. In monetary ways, we can deal with inflation through, number one, increasing the reserve ratios or reserve requirements of banks to make sure that after you open the floodgates, you can close them later on. Number two, you can actually increase interest rates in order to make sure that you're able to contract the amount of money you have in the economy after you've opened the floodgates. And three, they can do open market operations, which means there are many instances where they become the buyer or seller of last resort to be able to come in and directly infuse money in the stock market, bond market, or even real estate market. And then the last one is austerity, meaning you can spend less after the point in which this debt ceiling is lifted when you're already being able to survive past that critical point. Ladies and gentlemen, it's quite important that we preserve the economy and ultimately protect the interest of the average person, the financial markets, and the businesses that actually pave the way for your country to be able to operate. We're very much willing to sacrifice short-term potential harm for the long-term to actually happen. We are very proud to open this debate on side proposition.